Book still sits in the same spot on the shelf. Third from the left, handle turned slightly outward, the way she always kept it. I haven't moved it in 4 years. Some mornings I stand at the kitchen counter in Orangeville, my coffee going cold, and I just look at it. And I think, Lorraine would know what to do right now. She always did. I retired from the post office after 31 years. Lorraine and I had plans. A road trip to Cape Breton. A winter in Mexico, maybe. Instead, she was gone by February of that year. A stroke that came without warning on a Tuesday evening while she was folding laundry in the bedroom. 67 years old? I was in the living room watching the hockey game. I didn't even hear her fall. After that, the house got very quiet. My daughter would call on Sundays. Not every Sunday, but most. She and her husband lived in Mississauga, about an hour south, close enough that a visit was never impossible, far enough that it rarely happened. She had a good job in pharmaceutical sales. He was in real estate. They had a condo on the 14th floor with a view of the lake and a kitchen that looked like it had never been used for anything more complicated than reheating coffee. I didn't ask for much. I never have. My neighbor Edith would check on me from time to time. She was a retired school teacher, 72, who lived alone since her husband moved into memory care, and Barry. She would appear at my door with soup she said she made too much of, or an extra portion of the butter tarts she baked every weekend. I think she knew I wasn't eating well. I didn't say so, but she knew. That was my life. Manageable. Quiet. Not unhappy exactly, but hollowed out in a way I didn't have words for. Then my daughter called on a Wednesday. Not Sunday. Wednesday. That alone was enough to make me sit up straighter. She was warm on the phone, warmer than usual. She asked how I was sleeping, whether my knee was still giving me trouble, whether I'd been getting out of the house. I answered carefully, the way you do when something feels slightly off, but you can't say why. Then she got to the point. She and her husband wanted me to come for Thanksgiving. Not just dinner, the whole long weekend. They'd fixed up the guest room, she said. They wanted to spend real time together. She said she'd been thinking about how little she'd seen me since her mother died, and that it wasn't right. She says she missed me. I said yes. Of course I said yes. What father wouldn't? I drove down the Friday before Thanksgiving, the 400 south, through the gray October light. The maples already stripped, the fields flat and pale. My son-in-law met me at the door. He was pleasant, shook my hand firmly, took my bag without being asked. My daughter hugged me for a long time. She smelled like the same perfume she'd worn since she was 19. The condo was beautiful in the impersonal way of places that have been decorated rather than lived in. Everything matched. The throw pillows matched the curtains, matched the abstract print above the fireplace. Lorraine would have hated it. She liked a room that looked like people actually sat in it. Still, it was warm. There was food. My daughter opened a bottle of Ontario Riesling, and we sat on the couch and talked until past 10. And I thought maybe I had been wrong to feel strange about the invitation. Maybe people just grow up and get busy, and then they remember and they try again. Maybe that's all this was. Saturday was fine. We walked along the waterfront. My son-in-law suggested brunch at a place in Port Credit, and I let him pay without arguing too hard. That afternoon, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea while they both disappeared into the home office together for a while. I assumed it was work. They both seemed like people for whom work was always happening somewhere nearby. Sunday was Thanksgiving. My daughter cooked a full dinner. Turkey, roasted squash, wild rice stuffing with cranberries, a green bean dish with toasted almonds. She was a better cook than she let on. We ate at the dining table with proper napkins and good dishes, and for a while it felt like something like family, or close enough to it. After dinner, my son-in-law brought out a bottle of Scotch. The good kind, a Glenfarclas 16-year. He said he'd been saving it for a special occasion. He poured 3 glasses, and then my daughter said she didn't want any and went to the kitchen to start on the dishes. So it was just the 2 of us. He was more talkative than usual. Looser somehow, though he'd only had wine at dinner. He asked me about my pension, in that roundabout way people ask when they actually want to know the number, but know better than to ask directly. I told him it was enough. He asked about the house in Orangeville, whether I'd ever thought about downsizing. I said I hadn't. He asked about Lorraine's life insurance, whether things had been sorted out properly after she passed. I told him everything had been handled. He nodded. He swirled the Scotch in his glass. He said it was good to see me and that they really did want to be more present in my life going forward. He said he and my daughter had been talking about the future, about what family meant, about being there for each other. I said I was glad to hear it. He smiled at me over his glass. Then my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I almost ignored it. I had my reading glasses in my shirt pocket, but I'd been enjoying the warmth of the room and didn't feel like breaking the moment. But it buzzed again, short and sharp, the way a message does when someone has sent a second one right after the first. I picked it up. The number wasn't in my contacts, Ontario area code, but nothing I recognized. The first message said, "Don't drink any more of the Scotch." The second said, "Get your coat, call a cab, leave now, please don't ask questions, and please don't say anything to your son-in-law." I put the phone face down on the table. My son-in-law was watching the television now, a football game he turned on low. He had one hand loose around his glass. He looked completely relaxed. That's what I remember, how relaxed he looked. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I stood in a small bathroom off the hallway with the fan running, and I read both messages 3 more times. My hands were not entirely steady. I thought about calling my daughter in from the kitchen and showing her the phone. I thought about confronting him directly. I thought about how absurd this was, how I was a 68-year-old man hiding in a bathroom on Thanksgiving Sunday because of 2 text messages from an unknown number. Then I thought about how hard he had pushed on the Scotch, how my daughter had declined hers without him blinking, how he'd poured mine first and waited to see me drink before he poured his own. I put the phone in my pocket, took my coat off the hook in the hall, and I walked back into the living room and told him I wasn't feeling well. "Older plumbing," I said. "Think I need some air." He started to get up, and I told him to stay. Enjoy the game. I'd just walk around the building once and come back. He sat back down. I walked to the elevator, rode it to the lobby, and stepped out into the cold Mississauga night. I called a cab, an actual cab, not an app, because my hands were shaking too much to navigate the screen. The dispatcher said 12 minutes. I stood on the sidewalk in the October dark, and I waited. The phone buzzed again. "Are you out?" I typed back, "Yes, outside." "Who is this?" 3 dots. Then, "My name is Fatima. I clean the unit 2 days a week. I've heard things. I'm sorry it took me this long to say something. There's more I need to tell you, but not by text. Can you talk?" The cab came before I could answer. I got in, gave the driver the address of a Comfort Inn near the highway, and called her back as we pulled away from the curb. She spoke carefully, in a quiet voice, as if she was afraid of being overheard. She told me she'd been cleaning the condo for 8 months. She told me that 3 weeks earlier she had been finishing up in the home office, the room they had both disappeared into on Saturday afternoon, when she heard them come back earlier than expected. She'd stayed quiet in the office, not wanting to startle them, and through the partially open door she had heard enough. They were in financial trouble, more than I'd known. A land deal my son-in-law had been involved in had collapsed, and he owed his business partner a significant amount of money. They had taken out a line of credit against the condo. My daughter's income alone wasn't covering things. And then the conversation shifted, and Fatima's voice dropped even lower as she told me the part that made the cab feel very small and very warm. They had talked about my house in Orangeville. They had talked about Lorraine's insurance money, which I hadn't touched. They had talked about what would happen if my health declined suddenly. They had talked about a specialist my son-in-law had apparently been researching, not a doctor, but a pharmacist he knew through a client, someone who could provide something that mimicked the presentation of a cardiac event and was very difficult to detect afterward. She went quiet after that. I held the phone against my ear and I looked out the cab window at the highway lights, and I did not say anything for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't panic, not exactly. It was something colder and stranger, a kind of slow recognition, like when you see a shape in the dark and you realize it's been there all along and you've just been refusing to look at it directly. The warmth of the invitation, the careful questions about the pension in the house, the Scotch poured just so. He had waited for my daughter to leave the table. I thanked Fatima. I asked her how she had gotten my number, and she said my daughter had it written on a notepad on her desk, an emergency contact list, the kind anyone keeps. She said she was sorry she hadn't called sooner, but she'd been frightened. She was here on a work permit. She was afraid of what might happen to her if she was wrong or if she was right, and no one believed her. I told her she had done the right thing. I told her that more than once because I wanted her to believe it. I checked into the Comfort Inn, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the beige room with the heat coming out through the baseboard, and I called the Peel Regional Police non-emergency line. That was not an easy call to make. I want to be clear about that. This was my daughter. Whatever else she was, whatever she had let herself become, she was still the person I had driven home from the hospital on a cold March morning in 1989. She was the one who had sat with me in the parking lot of the cancer clinic when we thought Lorraine's lump was something worse than it turned out to be. She was the girl who used to fall asleep on car trips with her cheek pressed against the cold window glass. I gave the officer the information. I gave them Fatima's name with her permission. I told them what I had heard and what I had not drunk. They took it seriously, more seriously than I expected, to be honest. An officer came to the motel within the hour. He was thorough and patient, and he explained what would happen next. They would need to investigate. They would need to speak with Fatima formally. They would need, if possible, to recover the bottle of Scotch before it was disposed of. I gave them the address of the condo. It was past midnight by then. My knee ached. I hadn't eaten since Thanksgiving dinner, and I wasn't hungry. I lay on top of the bedspread in my clothes, and I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about Lorraine, the way you do when something is too large to hold on your own. I thought about what she would say. Probably something practical. Probably something about calling the insurance company in the morning and changing the beneficiary on the policy while I still could. She always knew what to do. In the days that followed, the investigation moved faster than I expected. The forensic team did test the Scotch. There was something in it, a compound my son-in-law had apparently sourced through the contact Fatima had overheard him mention. Enough to be significant, enough to be taken very seriously by the Crown Attorney's office in Peel. They were arrested on a Tuesday, both of them. My daughter called me from the police station. It was the hardest phone call I have ever received. She was crying in a way I'd never heard from her before. Not like the crying of someone falsely accused, but like someone who had finally reached the bottom of something and was terrified of what was at the bottom with her. She said my son-in-law had been the one. She said she had known something was wrong but had told herself she didn't know. She said she was sorry. I listened. I didn't hang up. I didn't say much. When she was done, I told her that I loved her and that I would get her a good lawyer. Then I said I needed to go. I meant both of those things completely, and I also meant that I was done. Fatima lost her cleaning contract with the condo building when everything came out. The management company terminated it automatically because of the investigation, even though she had done nothing wrong. She had done the opposite of wrong. She had done the opposite of wrong. She had done something that cost her something real. I called her 3 weeks after everything happened. I asked if she would be willing to come to Orangeville. She came on a Saturday morning, and we sat at the kitchen table with tea and butter tarts that Edith had brought over, and I made her an offer. I have a large house. I am not a young man. There are things I can no longer manage easily on my own. Not in a medical sense, not yet, but in the accumulating daily sense of a house that was built for 2 people and now holds 1. I asked her if she would consider a formal household management arrangement. Proper pay, proper contract, her own schedule. She was overqualified for cleaning. She spoke 3 languages and had run her own cleaning service for 2 years. She knew systems, she knew people, she knew what it meant to show up reliably. She asked me why I was offering this to her specifically. I said because she had risked something real to do the right thing when it would have been much easier not to. That was a quality I wanted near me. She thought about it for 2 weeks. Then she said yes. She renegotiated her work permit and began in November. On her first day, she rearranged the kitchen entirely, and it made much more sense afterward. I didn't tell her about the mug. She left it exactly where it was. Handle turned slightly outward. I don't know if she noticed or if it was coincidence. Either way, I was grateful. Some people will read this and say I should have known, that a father should sense when something is wrong with his own child. Maybe, but I think most of us are trained from birth to read love as love, to take a warm invitation as a warm invitation, to believe that the people we made and raised are fundamentally incapable of certain things. That training runs very deep. I don't think it makes us foolish. I think it makes us human. I still talk to my daughter. It is a different kind of talking. Careful, measured, across a distance that may never fully close. The legal process will take its time. I have accepted that I cannot fix what she became or understand exactly when she became it. I can only stay honest about what happened and what I hope for next. I hope for quiet mornings with cold coffee and a mug on a shelf. I hope for Edith's butter tarts on a Saturday. I hope for someone nearby who tells the truth even when it costs them something. The rest I'm still working out. I keep coming back to the mug. Third from the left, handle turned outward. It hasn't moved, and I think that's where the story really starts. Not at the dinner table in Mississauga. Not in a motel room off the highway, but at a kitchen counter in Orangeville, a man standing alone with cold coffee, trying to hold together a life that had lost its center. What happened to me that Thanksgiving wasn't just a betrayal. It was the end result of a long chain of choices. Theirs, yes, but also mine. I had been too willing to read warmth as warmth. Too grateful for an invitation I should have questioned. That's not self-blame exactly. It's something closer to honesty about how badly most of us want to believe that the people we love are still the people we raised. But here's what I've learned about cause and consequence. The kind that has nothing to do with luck or fate, it moves in straight lines. My son-in-law's choices didn't begin with a pharmacist contact and a bottle of Glenfarclas. They began, probably, years earlier. Small compromises, small dishonesties, a slow erosion of the line between what you want and what you're willing to do to get it. Greed doesn't arrive fully formed. It grows in the space where integrity used to be. And Fatima's choice didn't come from nowhere either. She made a decision that cost her something real. Her contract, her sense of safety, the uncomplicated position of someone who just does her job and goes home. She chose to act anyway. That's not a small thing. That's what I'd call the quiet kind of courage that most people never see, because it doesn't announce itself. She didn't know what would happen. She did it anyway, because it was right and because she had the steadiness of character to follow through even when it frightened her. I've thought a lot about what separates the people in this story. Not wealth, not age, not circumstance. It comes down to three things, I think, that I've watched matter across 68 years of living. The first is character, knowing what's right and being unwilling to bargain it away, no matter how convenient it would be to do so. My son-in-law was intelligent enough to construct an entire plan. What he lacked was the moral grounding to ask himself whether he should. The second is judgment, the kind that comes from paying attention, from being willing to sit with discomfort rather than explain it away. I almost ignored those messages. I almost put the phone down and finished the Scotch. The small voice that made me stand up in that bathroom was the same voice that decades of paying attention had kept alive in me. The third is the willingness to keep going when things fall apart, not to pretend they haven't, not to collapse under them, but to actually keep going. Edith showing up with butter tarts. Fatima rearranging the kitchen on her first day. Me picking up the phone and calling the police at midnight knowing it would change everything, and doing it anyway. I can't tell you what my daughter will do with what's happened. That's not mine to control. I can tell you that I'm still here, in the house in Orangeville, with the mug on the shelf and someone nearby who tells the truth. That's enough to build on.